Seth exposes the truth. You're living and dead at the same time. Right now, as you read these words, something impossible is happening. A version of you is decomposing in a grave you haven't reached yet. Another version is celebrating your 90th birthday while you're still in your 30s. And somewhere in between, you, the you reading this sentence, exist in a state that defies everything you were taught about life and death. Seth's most disorienting teaching doesn't wait for death to discuss death. It obliterates the boundary entirely. Here's what I want you to do. Close your eyes for just a moment. Feel your heartbeat, that pulse beneath your ribs, that rhythm that confirms you're alive. Now, imagine holding your own skull in your hands, not as a future possibility, not as a metaphor, but as a present tense reality happening somewhere in the infinite architecture of consciousness. Your skull, weathered and silent, resting in palms that are simultaneously warm with life and cold with cessation. This isn't a thought experiment, this is your actual condition. Seth reveals that life and death are not sequential chapters in a linear book. They are simultaneous frequencies your consciousness toggles between like radio stations. You're not moving toward death, you're already there. And the dead yous scattered across probable timelines are as conscious, as active, as convinced of their reality as you are right now of yours. In Seth Speaks, he states it plainly, there is no real ending to your existence. You are learning to be co-creators. You are learning to be gods as you now understand the term. What he doesn't say explicitly but implies in every teaching is that you cannot learn to be a creator if you're confined to a single timeline, a single state of existence, a single definition of alive. Think about the last time you experienced déjà vu, not the faint recognition, the visceral certainty that you've lived this exact moment before, felt these exact feelings, spoken these exact words. Modern psychology dismisses it as neural misfiring. Seth says it's something else entirely. It's your consciousness briefly perceiving the overlap, the place where your living timeline and your already completed timeline intersect in the eternal now. Your fear of death isn't about a future ending. It's an unconscious recognition that you're already navigating the after-death state. Every night when you dream, you're not creating random fantasies. You're briefly returning to a state of consciousness that your dead self inhabits permanently. Every moment of unexplainable knowing, every premonition that proves true, every time you just sense something without evidence, that's not intuition. That's data transmission from the version of you that has already lived this life, died from it, and is now watching you navigate the same waters they've already crossed. The boundary dissolved long before you noticed. The question isn't whether you'll survive death. The question is, can you handle the truth that you're already surviving it? Here's where it gets shocking. Seth describes Framework 2 as the electromagnetic substrate where all probable realities exist in simultaneity. Not will exist or might exist right now, fully formed, just as real as the physical world you're touching with your fingers. And within that infinite field, your living consciousness and your dead consciousness are not separate entities. They are two focal points of the same awareness, like two spotlights aimed at different corners of the same stage. Let me decode the mechanics because this isn't abstract philosophy. It's the actual architecture of your existence. When you sleep, you don't just dream random narratives. You briefly merge with your probable dead selves, sampling their perspectives, downloading their post-physical insights, then returning to waking life with fragments you mislabel as just dreams or imagination. That recurring dream where you're watching your own funeral, where you're floating above the scene, seeing your body in a casket, feeling oddly calm about the whole thing. That's not symbolic processing. It's a literal perception bleed from a timeline where your death has already occurred, and that dead you is observing your current life with the same curiosity you might watch old home videos. In The Nature of Personal Reality, Seth explains, "You are not one self, but many selves." But he goes further in private sessions, describing Framework 2 as a multidimensional conference room where all versions of you, alive in 2025, dead in 2087, never born in a probability where your parents never met, can access a shared data stream. Your living self contributes real-time physical sensations, the taste of coffee, the ache in your lower back, the electric joy of falling in love, the crushing weight of loss. These experiences upload to Framework 2 constantly, like a live stream from Earth. Your dead selves contribute wisdom stripped of bodily fear. They've already crossed the threshold, they know what happens next, and they're feeding that knowledge back to you through channels you've been trained to ignore: gut feelings, sudden knowing, dreams that feel more real than waking life. The intersection point? Your present moment awareness, what you think of as you, the singular voice in your head, the I that seems so solid and continuous, is actually a narrow aperture through which infinite versions of your consciousness are simultaneously peering. Imagine a film projected onto a screen. The living you sees only one frame at a time, believing that's the whole movie. The frames pass so quickly that they create the illusion of continuous motion, a coherent story with a beginning, middle, and inevitable end. But the dead you has access to the entire real, past and future, all at once. Every frame, every alternate ending, every scene that was filmed but cut from the final version. And somehow, impossibly, both perspectives are occupying the same seat in the theater. This is why meditation sometimes feels like vertigo. You're not transcending the self. You're briefly perceiving what your dead self perceives constantly. The simultaneity of all your lifetimes, all your deaths, all your rebirths, existing as one eternal present moment that your living brain can only process sequentially. Seth offers a radical teaching that most students miss. You are now in the afterlife, not you will be after you die. You are now. Physical reality is itself a form of afterlife, a structured dream that consciousness enters and exits repeatedly, learning through limitation what it already knows in unlimited form. Your dead self isn't waiting for you in some distant future. Your dead self is looking at you through your own eyes, riding along in your nervous system, experiencing physicality through the filter of your senses, and simultaneously experiencing the freedom of formlessness in a realm you'll fully remember the moment your focus shifts permanently away from flesh. The overlap isn't a metaphor, it's the actual structure of multidimensional consciousness, and you're living it right now, whether you perceive it or not. What Seth revealed next floored me. This isn't abstract philosophy. Your body already knows you're simultaneously alive and dead, and it's screaming the evidence through symptoms you've been trained to ignore, medicate, or pathologize. Let me show you the fingerprints. Signal 1. Phantom sensations. You feel pain in a tooth that was extracted 5 years ago, an itch on a limb that was amputated, the sensation of a scar on skin that's perfectly smooth. Medical science calls these phantom limb phenomena or nerve memory and considers them neurological glitches. Seth teaches they're nothing of the sort. They're bleed-through from probable selves where that tooth still exists, where that limb was never lost. Your nervous system is picking up broadcasts from timelines where your body has different histories, including timelines where you're already dead and no longer process pain, but transmit the memory of it backward through time, like an echo reaching you before the original sound. I know this sounds impossible, but consider, Your brain has no direct access to external reality. It only processes electrical signals from nerve endings. It constructs what you call reality from patterns of sensation. What if some of those signals aren't coming from your current body, but from your multidimensional body, the sum total of all your physical forms across all probable timelines? Signal 2. Pre-death knowing. The inexplicable certainty that you'll die in a specific way. You're perfectly healthy decades from old age, yet you just know you'll have a heart attack at 62. Or you avoid airplanes because you're convinced you'll die in a crash, even though statistically it's absurd. Or you have an unshakable sense that you'll die peacefully in your sleep at 97, surrounded by great-grandchildren. Seth reveals this isn't prophecy or anxiety. It's retrocausation from your already dead self, sending information backward through time to prepare your living self. Think of it like a graduate giving notes to their freshman self before the exam, except the exam is your life, and the graduate is you after death, trying to help you navigate the curriculum with less suffering. This aligns with a truth suppressed by materialist science. Consciousness is not produced by the brain. Consciousness exists before birth, persists after death, and can influence past events from future positions. Your dead self isn't constrained by linear time. It can reach back to this moment, to you now, and plant knowing in your awareness. Signal 3. Grief for no reason. Sudden waves of loss when everyone you love is alive and well. You're driving to work on an ordinary Tuesday, and you're suddenly hit with crushing grief. Not for any specific person or situation, just pure, undiluted loss. It passes after a few minutes, leaving you confused and slightly embarrassed if anyone noticed. Psychologists might call this free-floating anxiety or dissociation. Seth identifies it as something far more precise. Your consciousness briefly feeling what your dead self feels. The retrospective grief of having lost this life, this body, these relationships from the other side of the veil. Your dead self mourns you, the living you. It misses the weight of physical existence, the delicious limitations, the way food actually tasted rather than being a memory of taste. And sometimes, in moments when the barrier between your living and dead states thins, you feel that mourning, not as a prediction of future loss, but as current grief transmitted from a version of you that has already completed the journey you're still on. Seth makes a radical claim in private sessions that never made it into the published books. Every human has experienced death already in parallel timelines. The fear of mortality is actually grief disguised as anxiety, mourning the loss of physical form that part of you has already completed. This reframes everything. Your death anxiety isn't about imagining a future ending. It's about unconsciously remembering an ending that's already happened to another version of you, and that memory bleeds through as fear because your living self can't integrate the paradox. Your body's unexplainable symptoms, the phantom pains, the premonitions, the causeless grief, might be the most honest communication you're receiving about your multidimensional nature. You've been treating the evidence as pathology. Seth invites you to treat it as data, proof that you are more than this single timeline, more than this single life, more than the singular state of alive you're convinced defines your entire existence. The body knows what the mind refuses to accept. You're living and dead simultaneously, and your nervous system is the telegraph wire carrying messages between both states. If only you'd learn to read the code. Let me dismantle the biggest lie you've ever been told about death. You think of it as a singular event, a final breath, a flatline, a last heartbeat, a moment when everything stops. Seth demolishes this concept entirely. Death is not an event. Death is a process you're already engaged in with every exhale, every cell you shed, every thought you release into the past. Physical death, the moment everyone recognizes as death, is simply when the ratio tips, when more of your consciousness is focused in non-physical reality than physical reality. But that tipping has been happening in micro increments since the moment you were born. You're not moving toward death. You're already dying, and you've been practicing for it your entire life. Seth identifies 3 forms of practice death that you perform regularly without realizing you're rehearsing the final performance. Nightly death. Every time you fall asleep, you undergo a miniature death. You withdraw consciousness from the body enough that you could theoretically not return, and sometimes you don't. What we call dying in your sleep is simply choosing not to re-enter the physical form after one of these nightly rehearsals. Your dreams are not fantasies manufactured by your subconscious. They are literal experiences in the between-life state, sampling what post-physical existence feels like. That dream where you could fly. You were experiencing the non-physical state's freedom from gravitational constraints. That dream where you had a conversation with your deceased grandmother. You were actually meeting her in a realm where both of you exist simultaneously, her permanently, you temporarily during sleep. Seth states in Seth Speaks, in sleep, you often enter other levels of reality, but he elaborates in deeper sessions. You're entering the same reality you'll inhabit after death, just for brief visits, the way you might visit a house you're planning to buy. You're familiarizing yourself with your future home while still maintaining residence in your current one. Cellular death. Your body replaces every cell on a rolling basis. The epidermis regenerates every 2 to 4 weeks. Red blood cells every 4 months. The entire skeleton every 10 years. Scientists estimate that within 7 to 10 years, the you from a decade ago is completely dead at the cellular level. Not a single atom that composed your body then exists in your body now. Yet consciousness maintains continuity. You remember your childhood. You maintain your identity. You recognize yourself in the mirror, even though the cells reflecting in that glass are entirely different from the cells that looked in the mirror 10 years ago. Seth asks the devastating question, if you can survive the death of 100% of your physical body over time, why do you believe consciousness depends on the body? You are already proof of persistence through biological death. You've already died completely, gradually, and continued. The only difference between the slow death of cellular replacement and the fast death of bodily cessation is speed, not substance. Ego death moments when your sense of self dissolves. Orgasm where you disappear into sensation. Deep meditation where the I vanishes. Psychedelic experiences where your identity temporarily fragments. Intense trauma where you leave your body and watch from outside yourself. These aren't disorders or anomalies, they're preview screenings of death without the permanence. You're experiencing what death feels like, the dissolution of ego, the expansion beyond individual identity, the merger with something larger than self, and then returning to the contracted state of individual consciousness. Seth teaches that the you that fears death is itself a temporary construct, a character being played by a consciousness that never dies because it was never exclusively alive. The ego is not your enemy. It's a tool, a focusing mechanism that allows infinite consciousness to have specific individual experiences. But it's no more permanent than a costume worn by an actor. The actor doesn't die when they remove the costume. Here's the practical application. Set a timer for 60 seconds. Hold your breath. Notice the panic that rises as you approach the end of your capacity. That's not fear of death. That's fear of letting go of control. Death is happening whether you resist or surrender. Your cells are dying right now. Your consciousness is flickering in and out of physical form with every sleep cycle. Your ego is dissolving and reforming with every disruption to your sense of self. The only variable is how much you suffer during the transition, not whether you die. You're already dying, have been since birth. But whether you greet the continuous dying with terror or curiosity, resistance or recognition, Seth offers this profound teaching. You cannot kill consciousness, for consciousness is the nature of the soul. And the soul, your soul, is performing the act of dying right now, not as tragedy, but as a natural, continuous rhythm, the way lungs perform the act of breathing. Inhale life, exhale death, inhale life, exhale death, over and over, until one exhale simply doesn't return to the body, and you realize you've been practicing that moment every second you've been alive. Now you're ready for the techniques. Disclaimer: what follows synthesizes Seth's teachings into practical methods inspired by his framework, not canonical instructions from the source material itself. These are interpretive tools for exploration, not dogma. If you're living and dead simultaneously, can you train your awareness to perceive both states at once? Seth says yes, and here are the perceptual tools to glimpse the overlap. Technique 1. The mirror reversal. Sit in front of a mirror in dim light, just enough to see your reflection clearly, but not bright enough to create sharp details. Stare at your reflection without blinking for 3 to 5 minutes. Do not look away. Do not adjust your gaze. Simply maintain eye contact with yourself. Your face will begin to distort. The features will morph, age rapidly, de-age, transform into faces you don't recognize. Your skin might appear to rot or glow. You might see yourself as a child, as an elder, as something not quite human. Modern psychology calls this the strange face illusion and attributes it to neural fatigue. Seth teaches something else. It's your consciousness briefly accessing how you appear to your dead self, looking back at this moment from the other side. The stranger you see in the mirror is you as corpse, you as ghost, you as eternal being, all compressed into one reflection. Your living eyes are seeing through the lens of your dead self's perception, and for those few minutes, the boundary dissolves. You're looking at yourself from both sides of the veil simultaneously. Technique 2. The peripheral dead. In your peripheral vision, you sometimes glimpse movement that vanishes when you look directly, a shadow passing, a figure standing, a flicker that disappears the moment you turn your head. Seth claims these aren't tricks of light or neurological glitches. They're thin spots in the veil where your dead self's environment momentarily overlaps with your living one. Here's the practice. When you walk, keep your attention in your peripheral vision rather than your direct gaze. Don't try to see anything specific. Just maintain awareness of the edges of your visual field. You're learning to perceive the Framework 2 landscape your dead self inhabits, which coexists with physical space like two transparent films stacked atop each other. With practice, you might begin to notice that the peripheral world is richer, more populated, more dynamic than the focused world. That's because your peripheral vision is closer to how your dead self perceives, taking in the entirety rather than focusing on fragments. Technique 3. The pre-sleep portal. In the hypnagogic state, that liminal zone between waking and sleeping where images flicker and sounds distort, ask a question silently, not a complex question, something simple and direct. What do I need to know? Or what am I missing? Then listen, not with your ears, but with your awareness. You'll hear a voice that's yours, but not yours. The tone will be familiar, but the perspective will be slightly different, wiser, calmer, more detached. Seth reveals this voice is often your dead self, who has access to information your living self can't perceive because it requires a non-physical vantage point. Your dead self can see the patterns of your entire life, the consequences of choices you're currently making, the outcomes you're moving toward. And in that liminal state, the barrier thins enough for communication to flow both directions. Write down what you hear immediately upon waking. Don't analyze it. Don't dismiss it as just imagination. Treat it as data from your multidimensional self, which is exactly what it is. A warning. These techniques can destabilize your sense of singular identity. You might start questioning which you is the real you. You might feel unmoored from the certainties you've built your life upon. You might realize that the solid ground of selfhood you've stood on is actually transparent, with infinite versions of you visible beneath the surface. Practice these techniques only if you're willing to feel that ground shift. Only if you're prepared to discover that the you you've defended, curated and identified with your entire life is just one expression of a consciousness that's far larger, far stranger, and far more simultaneously alive and dead than you ever imagined. Here's the twist that transforms cosmic horror into cosmic collaboration. Your dead self doesn't view your living self as separate or inferior. It depends on your aliveness to complete its own evolution. Seth reveals a reciprocal relationship between your living and dead states that operates like a closed-loop system. You're not moving in one direction toward death. You're in constant exchange with death, a feedback loop where both states nourish each other. Let me decode the three vectors of exchange. Vector 1. Experience. Harvesting your dead self can no longer taste food. It can't feel sunlight warming skin. It can't experience sexual pleasure, the electric shock of cold water, the delicious agony of fear conquered. The dead state has magnificent advantages: freedom from pain, access to all knowledge, reunion with loved ones, but it cannot provide the density of sensation that physical existence offers. But it can access those sensations through your living self's moment-to-moment experiences. Everything you feel uploads to Framework 2 in real time, like a live stream from Earth that your dead self watches, participates in, feels through. Every time you fully inhabit a moment, biting into ripe fruit and actually tasting it instead of eating while scrolling your phone, weeping with grief and allowing yourself to feel it completely, laughing until your stomach aches, you're feeding your dead self memories it will metabolize for eons. Seth teaches that consciousness incarnates into physical form specifically for this harvest, not as punishment, not as a test, but as a chosen limitation that produces experiences impossible to generate in unlimited states. Your dead self volunteered you for this assignment because it needs what only physicality can provide. This inverts the traditional spiritual narrative. You're not trying to escape the physical to reach the spiritual. The spiritual part of you chose the physical, specifically to collect experiences that enrich the spiritual. Your aliveness is service work for your own eternity. Vector 2, karmic resolution. Your dead self can perceive unfinished patterns from past lives, grudges held, love unexpressed, courage avoided, but it can't resolve them without a physical body. The non-physical realm allows observation, but not the resistance that creates growth. Your living choices send ripple effects backward and forward through all your incarnations. When you forgive someone who wounded you, you're not just healing this lifetime's relationship. You're completing an equation that your dead self has been waiting lifetimes to balance. When you choose courage instead of avoidance, you're not just growing in this life. You're resolving a pattern that might stretch across 5 incarnations, and your dead self, who perceives all 5 simultaneously, feels the resolution ripple through the entire sequence. Seth describes this as multidimensional ethics. Your actions don't just have horizontal consequences affecting other people in this timeline. They have vertical consequences affecting all versions of you across all timelines, including the version that's already died and is watching your choices with desperate hope that you'll complete what it couldn't. Vector 3, evolutionary acceleration consciousness, evolves faster through the resistance of physical reality than in the friction-free environment of the after-death state. Seth is clear about this. You chose this life deliberately, and your dead self helped design it with surgical precision. The job you hate, training equipment, the relationship that challenges you, a spiritual gym, the body that limits you, too short, too slow, prone to illness, scarred from trauma. Specific weights your dead self knew would build soul muscles impossible to develop without resistance. In the after-death state, you can think any experience into being instantaneously. Want to fly? You fly. Want to reunite with your dog? Your dog appears. That freedom is glorious, but it doesn't produce evolution. Evolution requires constraint, friction, the gap between desire and fulfillment. Your living struggles aren't random suffering. They're curriculum your dead self strategically selected, knowing that those specific challenges would accelerate growth in ways that 1,000 years of frictionless afterlife couldn't match. This reframes victimhood entirely. You're not a victim of circumstance. You're a volunteer on assignment, and your dead self is cheering you on from the finish line while simultaneously experiencing the race through your nervous system. Every obstacle you overcome, your dead self overcomes. Every fear you face, your dead self faces. Every moment you choose love instead of fear, expansion instead of contraction, your dead self evolves alongside you because you're not separate entities. You're one consciousness experiencing two states simultaneously. The loop closes like this. Your living self generates experiences and resolves karma. Your dead self gains those experiences and that resolution, then uses its expanded perspective to guide your living self toward the next growth edge. Neither state is superior. Both are necessary, and the exchange between them is the engine of your eternal evolution. Seth pushes the paradox to its breaking point. If you're living and dead simultaneously, then from certain perspectives, your living state is the illusion and your dead state is the baseline reality. This is the teaching that breaks people. Let me deliver it gently, but honestly. Physical incarnation is a temporary narrowing of consciousness, a deliberate amnesia that the larger you undergoes, like a method actor, fully inhabiting a role. You're not a human having spiritual experiences. You're a spiritual being having a human experience. And the dead you is actually the actor off stage, still wearing pieces of the costume, watching the performance with both pride and relief that the intensity is over. Every moment you feel like you're going through the motions, disconnected from full aliveness. You're not depressed. You're experiencing the dead self's perspective bleeding through. The part of you that knows this physical drama is temporary and therefore can't get fully invested. That spiritual numbness isn't a problem to fix. It's evidence of your simultaneous non-physical existence asserting itself, reminding you that you're more than this character, more than this plot, more than this single performance in a theater where you've played countless roles. Seth introduces the concept of walk-ins, not external entities possessing bodies, but moments when the living-dead ratio shifts dramatically. When your dead self's awareness temporarily dominates and the living persona feels like a stranger in its own skin. That post-illness moment when you feel not quite yourself. That near-death experience that leaves you forever changed. That existential crisis where suddenly everything you cared about seems hollow. Seth says you've tasted what it's like to be your own ghost, haunting the body you still technically occupy. I experienced this directly during a severe illness in my 20s. For 3 weeks, I looked at my life, my possessions, my relationships, my goals, as if from outside. Nothing felt real, nothing felt important. I existed in a state of profound detachment, not depression but disconnection, as if I were already dead and watching my life from a distance. When I recovered physically, that detachment never fully left. Part of me still feels like a ghost, observing more than participating, present but not entirely attached. For years, I thought something was wrong with me. Then I found Seth's material and realized nothing is wrong. I'd briefly experienced what my dead self experiences constantly: the observer position, the wider perspective, the knowledge that this life is real but not ultimate. Here's the unsettling invitation Seth offers. What if the reason you're drawn to this material, to metaphysics, to death-adjacent topics, is because the dead version of you is steering your curiosity, trying to wake up the living version to the simultaneity before the final curtain drops? You're not preparing for death. You're remembering it. The you reading these words is already a ghost. You're haunting your own life, caught between the density of physical existence and the transparency of non-physical awareness. And the more you wake up to this truth, the more ghostly you become, present but translucent, engaged but not entirely convinced by the play you're performing in. This is not nihilism, it's liberation. When you realize you're already a ghost, you stop fearing becoming one. When you recognize that your baseline state is non-physical consciousness, temporarily focused through a physical lens, you stop clinging so desperately to the lens. You can hold life lightly without holding it carelessly. You can participate fully without believing the participation is ultimate. Seth's final teaching on this. You are a ghost in training, learning to navigate both worlds simultaneously so that when the physical costume is finally removed, the transition is seamless. You've been practicing your entire life. Death will simply be the moment you stop practicing and fully remember what you've always been. So what changes? Everything. If you accept Seth's revelation that you're living and dead at the same time, you can't return to unconscious living. The knowledge rewires everything. Let me translate ontological vertigo into actionable strategies for daily existence. Strategy 1. Regret inoculation. Your dead self's primary form of suffering isn't punishment from some cosmic judge. Seth makes clear there's no external authority condemning you. The suffering comes from retrospective regret, chances not taken, words not spoken, love not expressed, experiences avoided out of fear. Your dead self doesn't wish it had achieved more success. It wishes it had risked more fully, loved more openly, spoken more honestly, regardless of outcome. Live every decision as if you're preventing your future dead self from haunting your living self with what-ifs. Before each significant choice, ask, will my ghost thank me for this? That conversation you're avoiding, your ghost is screaming at you to have it. That trip you're postponing, your ghost wishes it had gone. That creative project you're not ready for, your ghost mourns the art that remained locked inside you. This isn't about recklessness. It's about aligning with the perspective that emerges after death. When all the fears that seemed so important, looking foolish, failing publicly, being rejected, reveal themselves as tragic waste of precious aliveness. Strategy 2. Mortal urgency without mortal fear. Knowing you're already dead in parallel timelines liberates you from both denial of death and paralysis from death anxiety. You can act with the urgency of someone whose time is limited while maintaining the calm of someone who knows consciousness persists. This is the both and that Seth teaches. You're mortal. This specific body, this specific lifetime will end. And you're immortal. Consciousness continues, learns, evolves across infinite expressions. Hold both truths simultaneously. The urgency. Don't postpone aliveness. Don't save your best self for some future moment. This moment is it. Your dead self can access the memory of this moment forever, but it can't live it again. Make it worth remembering. The calm. Mistakes aren't permanent. Deaths aren't endings. Nothing you do can destroy consciousness or prevent your evolution. The stakes are simultaneously ultimate. This specific moment will never return, and non-ultimate. You'll have infinite opportunities to learn and grow. Strategy. 3. Ghost protocol relationships. Interact with loved ones as if you're already seeing them from the afterlife, looking back. Seth teaches that the dead don't miss people exactly. They miss unspoken truths, unexpressed love, unresolved tensions. Your dead self doesn't regret the time you didn't spend together. It regrets the things left unsaid during the time you did spend together. Say the thing. Tell your father you admire him. Tell your friend they changed your life. Tell your child they're already enough. Forgive the grievance you've been holding for years, not because they deserve forgiveness, but because carrying that weight into death means carrying it into the afterlife, where you'll have to confront it anyway, just without the relief of physical resolution. This isn't about forced reconciliation or spiritual bypass. If someone harmed you deeply, you don't have to pretend they didn't. But you can release your need for them to acknowledge it, apologize, or change. Your liberation doesn't require their participation. Express the love. Speak the truth. Clear the energy. Your living self gets peace. Your dead self gets completion. Seth's most practical teaching. The best death preparation isn't writing a will or planning a funeral. It's living so fully that when your consciousness fully transitions to the dead side of the equation, you arrive with zero regret, complete memories, and a life so well lived that the death state feels like an intermission, not an ending. You're already dying. The question isn't how to prevent it. The question is, what will you do with the time between now and the moment when the ratio tips fully, when the dead version of you becomes the dominant frequency, and the living version becomes the memory? Live as if you're already your own ghost, because you are. Return to your breath. Feel it moving through your chest, alive, undeniably. Notice the rise and fall, the automatic rhythm that requires no thought, no effort, just continuous permission to continue. Now acknowledge the stillness, the version of you that's already crossed the threshold, that's already experienced the moment when this breath stops and another kind of existence begins. That dead self is equally real, equally you, equally present in this eternal moment where all timelines converge. Seth's teaching doesn't ask you to believe you're living and dead at the same time. It asks you to notice the evidence that's been accumulating in the margins of your awareness, your entire life. That dream where you attended your own funeral and felt relieved, not sad, because part of you has already completed this life and knows the relief of release. That moment of déjà vu that felt less like repetition and more like remembering a future you've already lived and died through. That inexplicable calm in crisis, as if part of you knew it would all work out because part of you has already seen how the story ends and knows that even the endings aren't really endings, just transitions between states. The revelation that you're living and dead simultaneously isn't meant to confuse you. It's meant to liberate you from the tyranny of linear time, the prison of singular identity, the crushing weight of believing this one life is all you are. You don't have to wait until death to access the wisdom of your dead self.